Hey peeps, welcome to another video. Today is part 3 of the McCalls 8009 sew along. So today we are going to be creating the trousers and finishing the jumpsuit. So let's get started. We are moving on to the trousers. The first step is number 28, stitch pants front and pants back together at inner leg. So we need one front, one back, and we're going to sew them together at the inner leg, and of course we are going to be doing that with French seams. I've pinned the inside leg together, wrong sides together, and I'm going to sew the first line of stitching at 1/4 inch. Once you've sewn your seam at 1/4 inch, you then want to trim it down in half. So we've got 1/8 inch left, and I'm going to do that for both legs. Once I have pressed it so that the right sides are together, I've then sewn the remainder of the seam at just under 3/8 inch to enclose all the raw edges. So what you want to do with these now is press one towards the front and one towards the back so that we can nest our seams when we sew the crotch together a little bit later. Okay, so I'm choosing to finish the crotch seam at this point because the trousers are still flat because we've only sewn one seam in. I am using bias binding. I have the right side of the binding to the wrong side of the fabric, and I am keeping the raw edge of the binding against the raw edge of the trouser, and I am sewing in the ditch around the curve. So this way I can finish off this raw edge. I can't French seam this because we are going to be putting in a zip in the back edge of this particular seam, so I'm going to use bias binding to finish it off. You can of course either overlock or pink this edge if you choose, but my preferred method is bias binding. Okay, so to finish the bias binding off, we want to wrap it around the raw edge. So I have my blind hem foot on because it has a guide, and I've moved my needle all the way over to the left. I do this with my fingers. So with my right finger I press the fabric flat, and then with my left finger I just press the binding flat and then sew. And we're going to do that all the way around. You can pin this into place, but I find that that's actually more time consuming because you have to remove the pins, and it doesn't always make everything lie flat. This does take a little bit of practice, but it is fairly easy once you get the hang of it. The next step is number 29, which is stitch pants front to pants back at side. So I have pinned it together, wrong sides together, because I'm going to sew this with a French seam. I've sewn the first part of the French seam at 1/4 inch. I'm now trimming that down, so we have 1/8 inch left, and then I'm going to go and press it so the right sides are together, so I can finish the French seam, much as we have done earlier. I've pressed my trouser together, and I have finished off the French seam with a line of stitching just under 3/8 inch away from this edge, and that has enclosed all of the raw edges. So I'm going to press these towards the back. Okay, so we're now going to sew the trouser legs together. So for crotch seam, turn one pants leg right side out, slip inside remaining pant leg, stitch, leaving opening above square, stitch again 1/4 inch away in seam allowance between notches, trim close to second stitching. I've finished my raw edges with bias binding, so I won't be trimming those edges, and I also won't be sewing right to the square. I actually just sew just past the in-leg seam because I like to use a longer zipper than the pattern recommends. I'm using a 30-inch zip, and that's because my hips are much bigger than my waist, so I find it very difficult to get trousers on and off if the zip isn't long enough. So we're going to turn one trouser leg the right way out, slip it inside the other, and sew the crotch seam. Okay, so I've turned one trouser leg the right way out, and I've slipped it inside the other one, and then I have matched up the front edge, and I know this is the front edge. It has the notches at the top there, and I've also put a pin into the front of my trouser panels just to make my life a little bit easier. So I have pinned the right sides together all the way round to the inseam here, and as you remember from earlier, we have nested our seams. So one is pressed this way, one is pressed this way. So I'm going to sew to probably 1 inch past that towards the back, and I'm going to stop, and that's going to just let me put my zipper in my preferred method later on, and then I can close that gap up and do the second line of stitching to reinforce this area later. So I'm going to sew this at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so the next step is gather up edge of pants between small circles. Oh, by the way, I have pressed my crotch seam open. Just that's something you need to do. So yes, gathering stitches between the small circles. They're about an inch away from the back edge where the zip's going to go in, and that is so that the gathers don't interfere with the zip, I believe. So I have run my gathering stitches 3/8 of an inch away from the raw edge, and then 3/8 of an inch away from that, as I did with the bodice. So my stitching line is in the middle here. So I'm going to get this pinned to the bodice and match up the centre seams, the side seams, the notches, and then spread the gathers evenly. So I matched up my centre, there's a notch around here, I've matched up the side seams and then the small dots to where we've done the gathering stitches from and to. So I've pulled all the gathers, moved them nice and evenly, distributed them nice and evenly along the entire length, and now I'm going to sew at 5/8 of an inch. I have pressed my seam allowance up towards the midriff piece. So the next thing that we need to do is put in our zip. So I've sewn my first side of my zip in, and you want to make sure that the teeth are 5/8 of an inch away from the raw edge, and I like to match up the top of the zipper tape with the top of the bodice, and I've sewn that in. I've then shut the zip so that I can mark in where the waist needs to go on the other side. So I'm now going to unzip this and put it into the other side, taking note of making sure that the waist seam is going to match up. I've sewn the second side of the zip in. I'm out by about 1 millimetre, but I am going to live with that because the thought of unpicking a 30-inch zip does not appeal. We now need to finish off the top edge of the bodice, because if you remember, I'd left the lining loose from the top of the edge of the bodice, and also I hadn't finished the understitching, so we can finish this edge now. I have sandwiched the zip in between the outer layer and the lining, and as you can see, that's the length, the seam stitching that I finished an inch away from the raw edge. So I'm going to stitch that one closed, and then I'm going to just continue the understitching to this edge as well, and that's going to just enclose the zipper tape, and it will make everything nice and neat at the top of the zip. So I'm going to get that done for both sides. Once you have sewn the seam and then done the remainder of the understitching, you should end up with something that looks like this. So the next thing that we need to do is close up the lining. So we are going to make a sandwich of the zip again, and you want to offset the lining by about 1/8 of an inch, maybe just a little bit more, and we are going to sew close to but not up to the edge of the zip to secure the lining to the zipper tape on the inside. I'm using my regular zipper foot to sew this seam, so I have the edge of the zipper foot up against the teeth, the coil of the zipper here, the teeth of the zipper here, and then I've only got my needle moved over so that it's not going to hit my foot. It's not right over as far as it'll go, which means I'm sewing about 1/4 of an inch away from where the zipper teeth are, and we want that. We want there to be movement room for the zipper pull to be able to go up and down. You don't want your lining stitched too close to the zipper teeth. I have sewn the lining to the zipper tape, and as you can see, I have offset the stitching. This is the stitching for the lining, this is the stitching that's securing the zip. You want to make sure that the lining waistband is, or the lining waist seam is folded back on itself, and we're going to turn this through and just double check how it's turned out at this top corner before we trim anything, because you will need to trim off the excess, but you want to make sure that everything is sitting nicely, which this one is. So I'm going to trim off the bulk, and then we're going to repeat the same process on the other side. There we have the top edge of our zipper finished nicely, and the interior is all stitched down as well. So we still need to sew up the bottom of the crotch seam. You can just see I've got a little bit of a gap there in the end of my zipper poking out. Right, this is how I prefer to sew my zips in without the bottom of this seam being sewn together. So I'm going to finish that off now whilst I still have my regular zipper foot on my machine. Okay, so I still have my regular zipper foot on, but I've got the needle moved as far over to the right as it will go, and I'm overlapping the stitching at the bottom of the zip by about 1/2 an inch, and I'm getting as close to that as I can do. I can't get right up to it, but I can get pretty close. So I'm going to back stitch here and then sew the rest of this crotch seam together until I meet up with the previous line of stitching, and then I'm going to sew another line of stitching from notch to notch just to reinforce this seam here. The last things that we have to do are stitch in the ditch or slip stitch the lining of the waistband lining to the garment, and I am going to slip stitch mine. And then we also need to hem our trousers. So I'm going to run a line of stitching around the bottom edge of these as a press guide so that I can fold the edge up once and then twice again to do, it's actually going to be a 3/4 inch rolled hem because I have tried these on and they are quite long on me. So, and I also want to have room to thread some elastic through here as well. So I'm going to hem the trousers and then I'll show you how I'm going to install the elastic. I sewed a line of stitching 3/4 inch away from the raw edge, and I've used that as a pressing guide, and I've pressed that once and then twice, and I'm now going to use my blind hem foot to edge stitch this edge down. I am going to leave a 1 inch gap at the inseam of both of these hems because I'd like to feed some elastic through here that's attached to some ribbon so that it can either be left loose and the trousers can be free flowing as they are, or I can pull the ribbon and attach a safety pin to each end of the loop of elastic and have them gathered at the bottom. And I think that's a nice way of having the option to do both. The pattern actually has you put ribbon in there, and I was worried that I wouldn't be able to have, because the ribbon was visible on the outside, and I was worried that I wouldn't be able to have them loose without the ribbon showing. So I think this is going to work. We shall see. But I'm going to finish this hem with my blind hem foot all the way around, leaving an inch gap at the inseam. So my little experiment, I'm going to report back once I've tried it on, but I have got a ribbon in the cuff of the trouser, and I've also got it attached to elastic. So as you can see at the moment it's gathered up, but if I pull on the ribbon, this is definitely not a quick change kind of situation. You will either be wearing your trousers gathered or you will be wearing them loose. But it's, like I say, it's not a quick change scenario. But you pull on the ribbon and out comes your safety pin. This is attached to 2 loops on the end of the elastic. So if you want to have your trousers loose, take the safety pin out and then you just pull the ribbon back on itself, and then your trousers are loose. So as I say, there is the 1 inch gap that we left earlier, and if you decide you want to have your trousers gathered harem style at the bottom, just pull your ribbon until you get your loops available and install your safety pin. You can of course put a button on if you would like instead. I don't have wide enough elastic or a small enough button to have done that, so I've gone for a safety pin, and the elastic is the same width as my ankle plus 2 inches, so it's not taut against my ankle, but it will be snug against my ankle, so I don't think that this is going to be too uncomfortable. But again, I will report back later and let you know how I get on. So let me show you how I've done it. So as I mentioned, you want the elastic to be snug around your ankle but not super tight. I've done that with 1 inch of extra room so that I can fold it over and make a 1/2 inch loop at the end of the elastic. I then got a ribbon that's the same length as the width of the trouser and then going back on itself. We want to have the ribbon again about 2 inches longer so that we can sew it to the ends of our elastic. So the ribbon is the width of the trouser and some extra, and then we've got the elastic. So basically you want to end up with a loop that is not going to put any tension on the bottom of your trousers when you don't want to have them gathered. Okay, so I have sewn the ribbon and elastic together at a 1/2 inch, and then I am going to fold that back on itself. And I'm going to do it so that the ribbon's on the outside. And with the ribbon free, I am going to stitch across this end so that I create a loop, and then I can thread it through the bottom of the trousers. I am threading the elastic through with my safety pin, and there we go. So we have the ribbon poking out the end, and we want to do exactly the same process. We want to sew the ends of the ribbon to the end of the elastic and then create a loop. Once you've created your loop, you can choose to store your safety pin on the loop. I'm going to do that because I know that I will, if I take this on holiday for example, I know I'm going to forget the safety pins and then I won't have the option of wearing it the different way. But you want to just pull it all through, and it's all hidden out the way and everything's lying nice and flatly. So I now need to slip stitch the waistband down, give it a final press, and then we're done. If you have any questions at all, please let me know in the comment section down below and I will do my best to answer them for you. I really like this jumpsuit. I do want to make some tweaks to it though. I like it as is, but I do want to try it moving the waist from the waistband down from the bodice and taking, because the waist actually sits on the pattern in the middle of the gathering section on the trousers, and I want to see what it looks like with the midriff panel extended and the back panel extended to sit on the waist and the trousers starting from the natural waist. I think that would look really nice. So I'm not going to be doing a pattern review for this pattern quite yet. I want to make the tweaks to the pattern that I've mentioned and make a new one and see which one I prefer. And I will of course add in a video to this playlist showing you how I make those alterations and the second jumpsuit I make from this pattern, and we shall see which I prefer of the end result, because I'm gonna keep both, and yeah, we'll see which one I prefer. The pattern review will be coming shortly. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye.